views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Good evening and welcome to Bronxtalk. In the fall, the city announced that it wanted to create a whole new Bronx neighborhood called Cromwell Jerome, though at this point, the name itself is not confirmed and it's being referred to as the Jerome Avenue Study. This extensive mixed-use development would run 73 blocks along Jerome Avenue between the Concourse and High Bridge. The opportunity is as massive as the project itself. Housing, stores, restaurants, businesses, not-for-profits, and more. It's a concept that stirs your Bronx imagination in what would be as large and as important an urban renewal project that the Bronx has ever seen. But Bronxites, who have felt burned time and again over being left out of development plans, made a pretty loud statement last week, coming out in the hundreds in support of self-determination. Tonight, we begin a two-part series on the Jerome Avenue study with an interview with a representative from a city agency. Next week, Bronx community leaders will have their say on Bronxtalk. If you'd like to have your say on the Jerome Avenue study, the phones are open. You can call in with questions or comments to 718-960-7261. You can also email them to us at bronxtalk@bronxnet.org or post them on our Facebook page, and we'll read those on the air during a future edition of our program. So many questions, so little time. We're thrilled that the Bronx Director of the Department of City Planning is here. Welcome back to Carol Samuel. Nice to have you with us.
Good to be here.
We were talking just before that the last time you were here, we were talking about the concept of zoning and I guess the lower part of the waterfront, lower part of the Bronx and the waterfront.
That's right.
Now we're moving up north and west just a little bit. Yeah. How did the idea of this new district or this redesign, this planning of a new neighborhood come about?
Well, when Mayor de Blasio released the housing plan last year, we saw an incredible opportunity to think about the neighborhoods around Jerome Avenue. Key to the housing plan is not just housing, but looking at neighborhoods as a whole. And that's what we're bringing to bear to this whole corridor. It's about a 2-mile corridor. But the area itself had been identified by both community boards 4 and 5, as well as elected officials, the Bronx Borough President, Diaz, and others for many years for a need for planning and investment. And with the housing plan, we thought this was a chance to bring a holistic planning process, engage the community in looking at the vision for the future, but also to help address the affordable housing crisis in the city.
Many people, and there's been so much rancor about it, and I try to have my ear to the ground. Many people said, you know what, Ms. Samuel and the city and the mayor and even the borough president and even the community boards are making assumptions about our neighborhood that may not exist. Who says that we need to redevelop? Who says we're not doing well? I've lived here all my life. I've lived here for a number of years. I have a business here. You know, why? Who are they to tell us what we need to do in our community?
Well, we're actually looking to engage the community in the very vision of how the community would develop. So, and in these areas that are all around the transit corridor. we're not taking this from just ourselves, but again from people who live and work in the neighborhood as well. So just as you hear that, we also hear we need investment here, we need housing here, we need help for our businesses, we need
jobs is certainly something I hear all the time.
I would also put as the backdrop, the Bronx is projected to grow 200,000 people by 2040. That's an entire community district if you think about it. And we need to be thinking about how and where we can grow as an entire borough in areas that are sustainable, that make sense. And this could well be an area that could take growth given its excellent transit access. I
should mention that we will also be joined by somebody from HPD in just a moment who can talk a little bit directly about the housing. In what you said, if I'm listening to what I hear people of the Bronx saying, in what you said, that's the danger. They said you're going to bring 200,000 people in, and when you do that, all of us who have lived here, who are struggling in many cases to pay the rent that we already have to pay, are going to be displaced and are going to be moved out. So while you or others may say, gee, that's nice, we'd like to bring more money in, we'd like to bring money in from the outside, the fact is, if we do that, and our history has been somebody's going to lose out. We're moving businesses out who have been here for a long time, and we're moving people out who don't live here. What's your response to that?
Well, I'd say a couple of things to that. So the Bronx is growing no matter what, whether we plan for them or not. I mean, that's the truth.
Okay.
That's just a population projection. But I would say, to the concern, and I hear it as a very real concern and understand it, that people are concerned that the people who live and work in these areas be able to live there in the future as well, after all the investment is done, the affordable housing is built. And I'd say that that's not a simple problem, and it's not a simple solution. It's very complex. And I think that one of the number one things that we can do, there are a few things we should do today to plan to make sure that our neighborhoods are preserved for Bronxites who live here today. We should preserve and protect the tenants. The de Blasio administration is absolutely committed to that, just announcing, $30-some million to help protect tenants in their current homes when facing harassment. It's a huge investment. The second thing is to build more affordable housing. That's the entire crux of the affordable housing plan. But we need to build more quality affordable housing at all income ranges. So that's getting the people who are there, living there today, but it's also the people who are growing within the neighborhoods. And finally, what we're talking about today, we need to plan and engage people in the planning process. And that's what we're doing with the Jerome study. It has a full suite of community engagement activities that you will ask me about. I'm glad to talk to you about them.
We'll certainly put up when the next hearings or meetings are, whatever you want to call them. There's a website that called the Bronx Coalition for Community Vision, and they say in there that community participation so far has been dismal. Of the community stakeholders at the planning meetings, almost none are actually community residents. You apparently and reportedly did a tour of the community. The way I looked at it from the outside, I felt like it was somebody who had been on stage and was booed off the stage. Apparently the study, it sounded like you went to get some information and talk to people, and they basically said, you know what, get out of our neighborhood. What are your thoughts about that, and thoughts about the fact that there is clearly a significant amount of people that, even though you say it's going to be done, housing will be done not to displace people, and we're doing it with the community engagement in mind, and yet this comes back, like a chorus. You're not doing that. I think that's just an affirmation of the great distrust that's there. The de Blasio administration is taking a very different approach. People are skeptical. From what happened in the past.
Yes. They're taking a much more holistic approach to planning, to neighborhoods, to the needs, thinking about current tenants. I would say that, as far as engaging people, we wanted to make sure that we had a process that would be able to engage the full range of people that live in this neighborhood. There are neighborhoods. There are almost 350,000 people that live in all of these neighborhoods surrounding this corridor. Okay, that's larger than the city of Pittsburgh. all right? I think you've already alluded to the grand scale of this. So we talked to some folks in the neighborhood to really find out what would be the most effective way to really reach people who live and work here. In the different languages, in the different locales, talking about the different topics. And we are just now starting that process. So the outreach is just beginning. We're having some open houses to really start that. But this spring, we will have a full visioning process with everyone invited to stay at the table.
Mm-hmm. I guess all you have to do is look at Willett's Point and see why people are concerned. Look at what happened down at the Bronx Terminal Market. I know some of those businesses earned some money, but some of them had to close as a result. I suppose if you look there, then you can understand why people are saying, gee whiz. All right, we're going to take a short break. We will be joined by Daniel Hernandez from HPD, who will talk in part about the housing piece of this, and more with Carol Samuel from the Department of Planning as well. I'm also, maybe we could put up the dates of the open houses that are coming up. So we'll be right back. Don't go away.
If you drive buzzed, it could cost you around $10,000. You'll face major legal fees, major fines, and steep insurance penalties. You could lose everything. Buzzed, busted, and broke. Because buzz driving is drunk driving.
Everybody has a dream. Mine was to see the ocean. And with a little help, I made it.
So, I got this new family. And I don't know what it is about this one, but she can't seem to put down that toy. Oh, and she even talks to it. Who's she talking to? Her mom? She talks to her mom a lot.
Live with a human for a while, and you get to know a few things. Like, I know she does strange tricks for no treats. But the one thing I will never, for the life of me, know is how she gets so tiny and inside that box. Natalie, how do you get so tiny?
Okay, there you saw the list of the meetings that are coming up. It's March 14th, March 19th, and then a Spanish meeting on March 26th. We're joined now by Deputy Commissioner of the Office of Neighborhood Strategies, Daniel Hernandez. Thank you for joining us, sir.
Yes, thank you for inviting me.
Appreciate you joining us. So we've been talking about development, and the leading concern clearly is displacement. Ms. Samuel referred to the fact that there would be some anti-displacement measures. Is that possible? Is there a way to allay the fears of Bronxites who say, you know what, every time something new happens, people on the lower end of the income scale get pushed out and don't get the benefit of the development? What do you think is going to happen, and what should happen here?
Well, it was actually the first thing we're hearing in all neighborhoods as we're going out and planning with neighborhoods and communities, that people have fears of displacement. Investment often brings fears of displacement into neighborhoods, so what we're doing is really being aggressive and proactive in the way that we're addressing their concern of displacement. So what we have is actually, I'm beginning to call it sort of this three-pronged strategy, where there's a carrot, there's a stick, and there's also partnerships. As a government agency, we can do so much. We have a lot of resources and information available to us. And I think the big strategy, the core of the strategy, is actually partnering with communities. So part of the neighborhood's planning strategy allows us to meet people, meet tenant advocates, meet tenants, meet community organizations that are actually working on these issues. We can bring our resources, and I'll tell you what our resources are, but we can bring them, but they're actually our bridge and link into the communities. So without these partnerships in this process, we're going to lose. But I think that we have a great momentum built because of the neighborhood planning and the outreach that's being done to begin building those connections.
At the Kingsbridge Armory, we had an historic community benefits agreement that was signed. It was legally binding. It is legally binding with the people doing the development. Is that kind of legally binding document a possibility here? And one of the things on the website that I referred to a moment ago, that they want to make sure it includes anti-harassment by landlords and anti-displacement policies. Is that possible? They're both shaking their head. Yes, I got my answer. But first you, and then Ms. Samuel can weigh in.
Sure. So part of the way that we're learning about what communities need are understanding what their household incomes are. So the core strategy for us is understanding what their incomes are, so then we can begin setting the rents and the type of financing we make available in the community to target that income level. So what we can make a commitment on, which is actually in alignment with the programs, our financing programs that we have, are you need affordable housing that's targeting $25,000 or less for a family of 4, for example. So we would then, all of our funding mechanisms would target that range of household, but of course we want to do the whole neighborhood because there are people earning higher than that. So what we are making a commitment is through our financing terms to say that we're building housing that targets the area household incomes so that we can commit then to building affordable.
Are we going to lose rent-stabilized apartments in this process?
So part
That's
of
a very big concern because you can say, well, we'll give you subsidies, but subsidies when all of a sudden something that's been stabilized now goes to market rate is a very temporary solution.
Right. Well, actually, I think what we're trying to do, and as we go out into the community, is we're going to try to allay some of those fears. So there's these misperceived percentages of housing units, rent stabilized and rent regulated units that were lost over the past 10 years. But we're actually doing a lot of research now to understand exactly what levels of rent stabilized units have been lost over the years, and the percentages are actually quite low. And actually what we're seeing is that because of HPD's involvement in the Bronx over the past decade, there's an actual increase in the regulated units that have been built in the Bronx. So we're not actually losing them, we're actually gaining them and have gained them over the past 10 years. We anticipate that with the amount of investment that we're planning on the neighborhood, that we'll continue to build affordable housing. And part of the planning strategy is actually then, so it's not only preservation, it's building new construction units throughout the neighborhood, but part of the planning process is to say, if you're planning on developing residential buildings in this neighborhood, you are going to be required to include affordable housing targeted these income levels. So there's a three-pronged strategy.
Boy, I got about 100 questions here. So first of all, the number that has been thrown about and has been accepted, it certainly was by the Bloomberg administration, was 80-20. Is there a 80% market rate, 20% affordable, which for people in the Bronx is baloney? You first, and then I know you're dying to speak. So let's let Mr. Hernandez speak, and then we'll go back to
So it's a funny misperception that's out there about these 80-20 buildings that we finance, when in actuality, the financing programs that we have are not just about 80-20 buildings. Frequently, if it's in the private market, we work with developers to target the units in their buildings, and the ranges, the percentage of units in any one project we finance can range from anywhere from 15 to 30. So the 80-20 myth is out there, and we've got to dispel that through this process.
Maybe you need to count the number of people who might be displaced or might need the housing, and then just align your plan with that. Right?
Well, we are.
That would be much more logical than coming up with some
random number. Again, that's the value of the neighborhood planning process, is we're beginning to get more specific in the strategy.
Do you want to comment, or should I ask you a couple of things?
Well, I was going to respond to two things. Sure. One was, how do the community needs get represented in this whole process, and how can we actually...
Good question.
Yes, okay. So I think first and foremost, this is a planning process. We will have a plan at the end of the day that will document the entire process that we've been through, the vision that the community has come to, the needs, the goals, everything that we've tried to articulate today, through the process. as well as aligning, and this is very important, and this is I think the de Blasio administration is making a very concerted effort to align capital investments with planning need. Now, that is...
It's basically what I was suggesting when,
yes.
when you
so it's
assess
not,
the community.
And we need to, through this process, identify what those are, but also prioritize what those investments should be. And so that's a very important piece of this, that it's the plan first, investments, and changes like the zoning. The zoning is just a part of the plan. Mm-hmm. The other thing I would say about the kind of affordable housing, we are always going back and looking at our rezonings, and we've looked even back to the lower concourse, where we've seen units. They're all affordable. Every single unit built has been affordable in the lower concourse. Many neighborhoods like that. Port Morris has been that way. Third Avenue.
So you anticipate, certainly
yes.
for people who potentially would be displaced, that could be done. I want to go back to the CBA question, because you were nodding your head. Do you think it's possible to get community benefits agreements
well, that's
in
what
this?
That's why I'm saying the plan is much more akin to that. So the community benefits agreement was a way for the community to speak what their needs were. The planning process is the way for the community to all come together. It's the whole community agreeing to this. So many different voices at the table.
It's been suggested on some of the blogs, Welcome to the Bronx was one that had it, that the Bronx's experience with Nos Quedamos is a good template for this, that Nos Quedamos basically was entrusted in many ways and took the lead on developing an entire region of the Bronx to great success. Is that a model that could be followed, or are we in a different place right now?
I think there are some very key differences in that the city there had developed a full plan, and the Nos Quedamos group said no, you can't, interjected and stopped this whole plan.
Much like the dialogue that's now, although you don't have a finished plan yet.
That's right. That's the distinction that I would draw. I think, though, having a community with its own vision, and there could be many different visions within the community that are already organized and ready to stay at the table. That's what Nos Quedamos did. They held our feet to the fire and stayed at the table. That's important.
And I'm guessing from the people that I have interacted with and I saw on TV and everything else, those people aren't going anywhere. You're going to hear from them. I want to get to a question, and both of you can weigh in, an extension of the dialogue I had with the borough president on this program about it just a couple of weeks ago, and that is the balance. In order to build up the economy, you don't want to take money from Burnside Avenue and give it to people on Jerome Avenue, and you don't want to take money from Allerton Avenue and give it to people on Bedford Park. You need to bring in money from elsewhere. That, of course, is what frightens people in the Bronx, because they say if you're bringing in other people, then all of a sudden we have no place. How do we strike the balance so that money comes into the community, helps to build the economy, helps to support the notion of jobs through this process?
I'll just say one thing.
And not hurt the community,
Yeah,
of
one of the
course.
things that we've been doing over the past few months is really kind of drilling down to understand even just the economics of the neighborhood, but retail spending. So we found that there are billions of dollars leaving these very communities, people who live here, work here, spending money elsewhere for things like the two largest categories that we found were grocery stores. That's not a surprise to anyone who lives here.
Well, because there's no good grocery stores in those
That's right. And sit-down restaurants, full-service restaurants. So that tells me that even the economy that's there today, not everything is
the trend in the Bronx and the fear from Bronxites that I hear all the time, and I don't want to cut down anybody's business, large or small, but they're going to get Applebee's, they're going to get Subway, they're going to get all these businesses that are not locally owned, and the people of the Bronx are going to get the $9 or $11 living wage jobs, and yet the people who really make the money are going to be people from elsewhere.
Well, I think
and if you build a restaurant, I mean, my suggestion right here is it should be owned by somebody who lives on 175th Street.
Yeah. One of the very important pieces of this planning is all of the different agencies that are coming to the table. So not only do we have Housing Preservation and Development and City Planning, but we have Small Business Services, the Economic Development Corporation. They're a very important player in this, in that we need to better understand the business needs, the local guy who wants to start his restaurant, or the guy who wants to grow his restaurant, what are his capital needs, and also the people who work for him, the auto worker, is he certified to do something that would allow him to get a higher wage or have greater job mobility? Those will all be a part of this planning process.
Mr. Hernandez, I had a conversation with somebody who's kind of a development analyst, and he said the Bronx is hot right now. Everybody thinks there's a place to build and there's space and there's all these kinds of opportunities. Are the developers, and what do you hear from developers who could build housing? The minute you say we're going to do affordable housing, they're going to say, guess what? That's not for me because I want market rate housing. I can't make the money. Can you, from a financial perspective, build quality, affordable, quote unquote, affordable housing for the people who live in those communities that want better housing and still attract developers to a project like this?
Yes.
In a word.
Yes.
I knew you was going to say that.
Well, I mean, there's a long history of HPD being involved in affordable housing development in the Bronx. Many projects are 100% affordable, and they're quality, lovely buildings that people want to live in, and we had tons of applicants into these affordable housing units. So we know there's demand, we know there's great developers to build it, and then the type of housing that we're talking about in these rezoned areas and requiring developers to build affordable housing, we're meeting with the developers to understand what their issues would be if we had these mandatory inclusionary zones. So we're trying to be as inclusive as possible.
And are we getting the answer to those questions,
yes.
Good answer
So
that we want to hear?
There's two ways. We're just understanding what their risk issues are and what their concerns would be about an inclusionary zoning. And on the other side, we're also analyzing the economics of whether these projects work and whether they would still be interested in developing these areas. And the answer continues to be yes.
Ms. Samuel, we're almost out of time. I do want, by the way, for Dahlia and the people in the booth, let's put up, there's a number for people who have issues with their landlords to call that office. And there's also an email address for people so that they can, that's the anti-harassment hotline, and an email address for people who are interested in this whole process and want to send an email and express something. What's the timing like? I mean, we're having this dialogue.
Yeah.
I'm guessing I'm going to have 15 shows on this before it's
that
done.
would be great, Gary.
Well, I'm happy to do it, but where are we at?
So we're really at the very beginning, and the open houses starting this Saturday will be the very first events. But this spring, we want to spend the time kind of gathering around the vision, doing some deep dives around housing, economic development, the neighborhood.
When do you think a shovel goes in the ground, and when do you think, or we can't even talk about that yet?
We have a long way to go before then. We have an environmental review. We've got the community plan to put together. We've got public review of both the plan and ULURP.
Gee, I want to have it done. Let's get it done. Let's get it great for the Bronx.
You're not the only
people.
one. You're not the only one.
All right.
Yes.
Carol Samuel from the City Department of Planning, thank you. Daniel Hernandez from HPD, thank you.
Thank you.
And folks, if you have further questions or comments on anything you heard on tonight's show or anything going on in the Bronx, you email them to us at bronxtalk@bronxnet.org. You put them on our Facebook page, and we'll read them on the air during a future edition of our program. We also forward them to the people as necessary and get you an answer whenever that is possible. So don't hesitate to get to us. We're happy to be in the dialogue. You can also see our archives, watch any of the old shows. You can find the show in 2009 when Ms. Samuel was on before. Just go to bronxnet.org. We're on Bronx Talk on the lower right navigation bar. Now, next week, part 2. Community leaders will have their say undoubtedly about this show and about the Jerome Avenue study. So we'll see you then. Thanks to producer Dahlia Gonzalez, director Shirley Arrieta. Bianca worked so hard on the show, and all the cast of thousands. We'll see you next week.